Okay, good morning all. We're going to talk about Tu B'Shvat, which has lots and lots of minhagim, and I think the style that we'll do is we'll be maschilim beginus and mesayim b'shvach. We'll start with what the billable part is, and we'll end up with all the regular minhagim. Now, I want to start like this. I will give a shtickle hakdama. In Pachas Yosef 16 Tisha B'Av in 1627, Sabbatai Tzvi was born in Smyrna, which is Izmir today in Turkey, and he had a relatively uneventful childhood. He was a child of a rich poultry merchant in Turkey, excuse the pun, and he grew up relatively regular. He went to yeshiva. He became somewhat of a Talmud Chacham, somewhat of a learned person. And at some point, he developed a strong netiyah to Kabbalah. And when he was in his upper teens, he started having some sort of breakdowns, mental episodes. And he started saying stuff about himself being Mashiach, about him being Mashiach. Now, it's interesting that most of the Rabbanim in Izmir at the time, in Turkey, they were mamash not geirisim. They didn't even feel the need to fight with him because they knew him. They knew him as growing up. They knew that he was just a troubled child. And they weren't really geiris his netiyah to claim that he's Mashiach. They just let it go. And it went how it goes. It progressed here, there a little bit. And at some point he moves to Constantinople. Over there he gets a little more pushback. Then he moves to Greece and Salonika, and he gets a little more pushback over there. Eventually he has like a real breakdown, like a break with reality. And his brothers, who were wealthy, wanted to be able to shtitz him, to support him. He was like the nebuch of the family. They said, why don't you go to Eretz Yisrael? There's not much going on there. You won't bother anybody. Nobody will bother you. And we'll support you. And we have letters that show the evidence. They were sending money to Eretz Yisrael to support him. He was like the nebuch, the throwaway kid in the family. His rich brothers were supporting him in Eretz Yisrael. At some point in Eretz Yisrael, or maybe in Egypt, he meets Nathan of Gaza, who was busy claiming that he was a Navi. And Nathan of Gaza made a parnasa from being a Navi because he was able to give people tikkunim. They would come to him and they'd say, I'm having, ruchnistic problems. And he would look at them and he'd say, okay, for you, what you need to do is A, B, C, X, Y, and Z. He would give them things and he would charge money for his services. He was a spiritual healer. So Nathan of Gaza, who was busy saying that he's a Navi, when he met Sabbatai Tzvi, this was his golden ticket. And he said, I had a nevuah that you are the Mashiach. And he started telling other people, plays on psukim, and he started announcing to everybody that Sabbatai Tzvi was Mashiach. Now, that time, Pachas Yosef, in the 1640s, the late 1640s, there was a big ruach in the street that the year, based on certain gematrias from Zohar, that the year 1648 was going to be the Shnas Geula. It was going to be the year that Klal Yisrael was redeemed. And there was a big open market for someone to be the Goyel. If we know already that the Geula is coming, there was a market for someone to be the Goyel. And between these two things, Nathan of Gaza, together with Sabbatai Tzvi's delusions, he was able to thoroughly convinced Sabbatai Tzvi that his delusions were correct, and they took the show on the road. They took the dog and pony show on the road. And they started, gathering up a big following all over the world, all over Poland, Litva, Hungary. They gathered Hamburg, Holland, Greece, Turkey. They gathered a tremendous following, and people started latching on to Sabbatai Tzvi. Now, Nathan of Gaza had one very important nevuah. I don't remember exactly the year, but in 1650-something, Nathan of Gaza had a nevuah that Sabbatai Tzvi, within 12 months, is going to march into Izmir, the capital of Turkey, the Ottomans, and the Sultan is going to cede control of the empire to him without a fight, because when Mashiach comes, everyone's going to be his servants, and the Sultan will just cede control and fade into the background, and everything's going to be fine. Now, the Sultan was less convinced of Nathan of Gaza's nevuahs, and he wasn't so okay with that nevuah that in 12 months he was going to cede. And he summoned Sabbatai Tzvi to Izmir, to the palace, to discuss this. And he said, listen, you know you're not Mashiach, I know you're not Mashiach. Either you recant and convert to Islam, or it's game over. Now it's interesting, a lot of modern day scholars believe that Sabbatai Tzvi was bipolar. And at the point when the Sultan of Izmir summoned him to his chambers, he was in down. And at that point, Hitaka didn't believe he was Mashiach. He was not in one of his ups. He wasn't in an upswing. He wasn't manic. He was depressive at that point, and Hitaka didn't believe he was Mashiach. And he was like, I'm going to make a fight about something I don't even believe in. And he became, I think he converts, his name becomes Amir Aziz, I'm forgetting, it was a long Muslim name, Amir Aziz something, and he converts to Islam together with 100 of his closest Hasidim in Izmir, and the Sultan gives him a pension, he gives him a place to live and a pension, and everything seems to be good. Now, Kedarkoi, it didn't stay depressive forever, and when he went back up again, then the Mashiach delusions kicked right back in, and the Sultan got reports that Sabbatai Tzvi is in his quarters with people doing all sorts of pidyonis and saying different incantations and tehillim and etc., and he's clearly praving Mashiach again. So the Sultan exiled him first to, the names are Turkish names, very hard to say, I'm not even going to bother, but he exiled him first to one location, then to another location. The Sultan basically banished him from being around people, and he dies at 50 years old, more or less alone. I believe we have some evidence that says that even until his dying day, he was still Jewish, and he still believed he was Mashiach. Now, that's his end. Now, but his movement didn't end so simply. Now, once Sabbatai Tzvi converted to Islam, so most people who followed him were like, okay, fine, he's Islamic, he's over, that's it. Most people, meaning in the big population centers all over Europe, once he converted to Islam, they were out. They were not convinced anymore. There was a small group who went with him to Turkey. These 100 families that converted with him, they became known as the Dunme. The Dunme. It's not so clear how to pronounce it. Now, Dunme in Turkish really means turncoat, like trader. And really what it meant is that these were people who were traitors to the Islamic faith. They became Dunme. They became part of Sabbatai Tzvi's clan. Now, these Dunme, they grew into somewhat of a sizable population, meaning just, over time. The Dunme grew into several thousand families over time. They had some interesting chilukim, let's say, between them and regular Jews. They had 18 Aseres Adibris, because they had the 10 that we have, and then another 8 that related to who they're allowed to marry from the Islamic world, who they're not allowed to marry, like their own 8 Aseres Adibris that they added on. And they had lots of other strange ideas. L'mashal, the idea that Sabbatai Tzvi had to become a Muslim in order to bring the Geula, that through Chet comes the salvation, and that became a very troubling aspect of the Sabbatai Tzvi philosophy, that like Chet is Gufa Maila. Through Chet, the good things come. In any case, the Dunme is where a lot of records of different Shabsai minhagim were preserved, meaning different minhagim that were prevalent in the Sabbatai Tzvi community were preserved. Now, one of the interesting minhagim that's preserved in the Dunme records, and that you don't find as much of, meaning the Dunme that we're talking about, let's say in the years, let's say from 1680 to 1725, let's say, before Hasidim, before that was going on, what you'll find by the Dunme that you find almost by nobody else is piyutim for Tu B'Shvat. The Dunme, in their record of Yom Tovim, they have Tu B'Shvat as a Yom Tif. This is a day that Sabbatai Tzvi celebrated. And they have piyutim that they say on these days of Tu B'Shvat. Meaning, I think everyone has seen today, there are all sorts of tefillas and Seder Limuds and things you say in the kapitluch that are said on Tu B'Shvat. I don't know how religious everybody is about saying all the different piyutim, but there's many piyutim today that are built around the Seder Yom Tu B'Shvat. But at that point, the Tu B'Shvat Seder was mostly by them, and by the Dunme there's preserved like a Tu B'Shvat, things that they say in Tu B'Shvat that they would do. Now, okay, that's like strike one, so to speak, that a lot of the ceremony attached to Tu B'Shvat seems to come from an outside place. Now, the second critique, the second taina is as follows. The sefer that popularized Tu B'Shvat, with all its star and with all its tefillas in our world, was a sefer called Chemdas Yamim. Now, the sefer Chemdas Yamim is a sefer that we don't know who wrote it. It's a sefer that has a lot of suggestions who wrote it. Today, I think most believe it was Rabbi Yaakov Yisrael Al-Ghazi who wrote the sefer, but it's a sefer that was published without a name. Rabbi Yaakov Yisrael Al-Ghazi published it saying, this is a sefer that I found, and it's full of nice things, and it's built on the Seder of the year. Over the year, different things that have to happen. Tefillah, Yom Tovim, and stuff like that. So now, in this sefer, there's a whole Seder at Tefillah that's built around Tu B'Shvat, a whole Seder that you're supposed to say. Now, the Sefer Chemdas Yamim is a Sefer that became extremely popular and wide-ranging in regular circles. And from there, this whole Seder at Tefillah spread. Now, it's interesting that the Makar for the Seder, for the Chemdas Yamim, where he gets this from, is another Shabsai reference. The Chemdas Yamim quotes from a Sefer, I think it's from a Sefer Birchas Eliyahu, that a Sefer Birchas Eliyahu, that in the end of the Sefer Birchas Eliyahu quotes as follows: Shamati, he says, from Reb Moshe Chagiz, Maram Chagiz, that who said over in the name of his grandfather, the Maram Galanti, or Moshe Galante, that, here, I'll read it for you. It says as follows. V'oid ha'diachi says, the Chasher ha'adam eitz hasada, since a person is daima to the eitz hasada, hinhagti gamkein masher isi miraboisei, I was manig, what I saw from my Rebbeim, when we marry Hanal, which refers to his grandfather, shayinoyig b'tu b'shvat, laharbois b'brachas b'birchas priya ilan. He was marbe to say a lot of brachas on priya ilan. Ulehespalo la'Hashem yisparach, and he would daven to HaKadosh Baruch Hu yechadash aleinu v'aleim, he should be mechadash on us and on the fruit, shana tova. V'yinoyig im lachal tesvav mine peres elu, his minig was to eat 15 different varieties of fruit. Al kol peri she'avayu kol echad b'fnei atzmo shalei midas balabayis, and he would have some, and any peri that would come limud parak echad dahainu. Okay, then he goes into some mishnayos that we learned and etc. So now the makar that the Chemdas Yamin brings it from is from a sefer Birchas Eliyahu, who's quoting from Rav Moshe Chagiz. Now Rav Moshe Chagiz, just by way of history a little bit, was a tremendous Shabtai fighter. Rav Moshe Chagiz was Rabbi Yaakov Emden's mamish, assistant. They fought Shabtaim together all over Europe. Rav Moshe Chagiz's grandfather, the one he's quoting from over here, Rav Moshe Galante, was a suspected Shabtai, was someone who was close to the Shabtai Tzvi's movement, was not someone who was so clean from Shabtais. And Rav Moshe Chagiz over here, it's strange that Rav Moshe Chagiz, who was one of the biggest fighters of Shabtai spreading, of Shabtai Tzvi's movement spreading, becomes the vehicle to spread this part of their world. The idea of this. Now this Sefer Chemdas Yamim was printed. With it had some limited, sidarim for Tu B'Shvat. Not so limited, some starim for Tu B'Shvat. And then a kuntris called Pri Eitz Hadar, which basically summarized the Chemdas Yamim and added on lists of new fruits and specific meanings to specific fruits based on something from Rav Chaim Vital. Now, Rav Chaim Vital is not talking about Tu B'Shvat. Rav Chaim Vital is quoting from the Arizal that certain fruits mean certain things, meaning just like the whole world is divided up into different elamas and different spheres, so certain fruits represent different elamas, different spheres. He's based on which ones have seeds, which ones don't have seeds, which ones have a shell, which ones don't have a shell, a skin, a shell, and he categorizes all the fruits into different manners, and based on that Rav Chaim Vital that's quoting from the Arizal, the Kuntras Pri Eitz Hadar takes, part one, the Arizal and Rav Chaim Vital's Torah fruits, and attaches it to the Chemdas Yamim's Seder for Tu B'Shvat, and together you get a specific list of 30 fruits that are supposed to be eaten with tefillas and with what they mean and what they stand for, and etc. Now that Sefer Pri Eitz Hadar is published tens, maybe hundreds of times. It's a little kuntris, and it's published it spreads like wildfire. There's no one who's not interested in it. In the whole Europe, in the Ashkenazi world, and then eventually to the Sephardi world also, the Pri Eitz Hadar is published again and again and again and again. It becomes extremely, extremely popular. So there are those who allege, I'm just saying this as an allegation, I said, well, maschilim b'gnus. There are those who allege that the whole Yom Tif of Tu B'Shvat, the way we know it, is really a Shabtai Yom Tif. It comes from Shabtai sources, from Shabtai Tzvi's camp. And Memela, even if it appears harmless, big deal, you're saying some tefillas, you're eating some fruit, make some brachas, say some tefillas, never a terrible thing to do. Even if it appears harmless, but the source comes from, outside a negative source, and, with something to be treated, suspiciously. Now, incidentally, not in regards to this, but the Satmar Rebbe, the Divrei Yoel, when he talks about Lashon Kodesh, not speaking Lashon Kodesh, not speaking Ivrit, so the Satmar Rebbe quotes, and he says that there's a Rif, there's a Ga'inim, that say that everybody's supposed to speak Lashon Kodesh, it's a Heilig Gezach. So the Satmar Rebbe says, that was then, this is now. Meaning now that it was co-opted by Shlachta people, we have to keep it away from us. And what's his raya that he brings is from Rabbi Yaakov Sasportas, who was one of the big fighters against Shabtai Tzvi, from his Sefer Tzitzis Nevel Tzvi, where he quotes a good minig that the Shabtayim has, and Rabbi Yaakov Sasportas says, even so, even if it's a good minig, you have to stay away from it because it comes from them. And Sam Rebbe applies this to speaking Ivrit, to speaking Lashon Kodesh B'zman Hazeh. Now, so there are those who say that a similar thing has to be applied over here, and something that comes from an outside source has to be treated with suspicion. So now, that was the Maschilim B'Gnos. Now let's go to Messiah B'Shvach. So let's figure out what the early sources of Tu B'Shvat is, and there's no denying that it was expanded widely over the last few hundred years, and that the Minhagim grew and grew and grew. That's not deniable, but we could show where the Iker sources are and how all these things are about some just continuations of what the core minig of Tu B'Shvat is. And just to start, there's a story of Chaim Moser that said over. Chaim Moser was once talking to a Litvish Rav. I have ideas who it might have been, but I'm not sure. And the Rav was complaining that the Chassidish Paiskim are being meisif all sorts of chumras on different issues. And this Rav was saying they're being meisif this, they're being meisif that, they don't stop adding things. And Chaim Moser tells him, look around by uns, At least what they're doing is they're adding to Yiddishkeit. Look around over here, it's not so simple. We're not adding anything. If anything, we're losing. So there's an idea that, adding to this, to these minhagim, to the flavor of the day, to add to more, is a heilig gezach itself. Even if it's something that's only a few hundred years old in regards to how much it grew and how big and all the specifics, it's all within the realm. So let's start as follows. Ba'atzim is a Mishnah, right? Everyone knows the Mishnah in the beginning of Rosh Hashanah says, Daled Rosh Hashanah saying. There are four Rosh Hashanahs throughout the year, and one of them is, the Mishnah says, Be'echad b'Shvat, on the first day of Shvat, Rosh Hashanah le'ilon, is Rosh Hashanah for trees, Kedivir Beishamai, according to Beishamai Shita. Beis Hillel says, B'chamisha Asar Boy, and that's Tu b'Shvat. On the 15th day of Shvat is Rosh Hashanah le'ilonis, according to Beis Hillel. So the Gemara says, the Gemara in the Fidal, towards the end of the first paragraph, the Gemara explains, what is this Rosh Hashanah le'ilonis? It says because most of the rainy season is done, and the fruits got the rain already, and now it's going to be time for them to grow properly and not to grow properly, so it's Rosh Hashanah le'ilonis because the trees, the rainy season is done. Now, Rashi over here in Rosh Hashanah, in Daf Beis Amud Aleph, Rashi says when it says Rosh Hashanah le'ilon, what context is it? Rashi says Rosh Hashanah le'ilon means leminyan shnei arla and legabe meisers. It's legabe meisers and arla. It's legabe zraim. The din that this is a Rosh Hashanah le'ilon has nothing to do with what we do with peiros, with eating peiros, with trees. It's legabe Arla Meisers. Now, incidentally, the Mishnah on Daf Tesvav Meral from Rosh Hashanah says, Ba'atzeres nidin ala peris. The din that the world gets on the fruit, if the fruit's going to be good or not, is on Shavuos, not on Tu B'Shvat. So Tu B'Shvat is li'ilonis, which is a purely technical din, legabi zraim. There's technical din in legabi zraim that apply to trees specifically, that those have to do with Tu B'Shvat. The din, legabi the quality of the fruit, and legabi peris that's on Ba'atzeres, on Shavuos, is what it says in the Mishnah. And some pointed out that the Yom Hadin Leperis is not Tu B'Shvat, it's elsewhere. Now as follows. So now, some of the earliest minhagim in regards to Tu B'Shvat comes from the idea of not making a tainus on Tu B'Shvat. The Rabbeinu Gershon Ma'ar HaGoyla, one of the earliest Ashkenazi Rishonim in the 1000s, in a tshuva that's brought down, Rabbeinu Gershon says as follows. Rabbeinu Gershon says you can't fast, can't make a tainus on Tu B'Shvat, and he explains as follows. He says, he says, this that you asked me, Tzibur shebikshu ligzer tana sheni v'chamisha v'sheni. They're in the middle of a seder of Tainesim, Monday, Thursday, Monday, and they want to fast on Tu B'Shvat also. They bumped into Tu B'Shvat. Upagu b'tainis rishon Tu B'Shvat. Imesh lachash l'Rosh Hashanah v'lidches atainis eloi. Should we be chayshish that it has a din of Rosh Hashanah and avoid fasting on it or not? So it says over in the Gershon v'atshuva, kach daiti, she'atainis nidchel l'Shabbos haba. Push it off to next week. Ve'in koivin taini is boy. You can't be kavei atainis on this. Why? Shlemetzinu tainis b'Rosh Hashanah klal. Fascinating thing. Rabbeinu Gershon makes like a hekesh Rosh Hashanah Rosh Hashanah. We don't ever find a tainus in Rosh Hashanah. We know Rosh Hashanah that we do, you're not allowed to fast. It's also a tainus. Because you don't fast in Rosh Hashanah. Says Rabbeinu Gershon, we don't find fast days on Rosh Hashanah. So therefore, even though this is Rosh Hashanah Le'ilanis, no fasting on this Rosh Hashanah. V'su, the Katani Bahadei Adadi, the Mishnah classifies them in one. It says Daled Rosh Hashanah same. Obviously, there's a similarity. These Rosh Hashanahs have something to do with each other. You can't fast in Rosh Hashanah, he says. V'chihechi, the Shar lesser b'tainis, just like the rest of the Rosh Hashanahs in the Mishnah can't fast in them. So nami lesser b'tainis, this one also doesn't have. V'afagav de'inu adifu minei, kivin dekatani b'hadi adadi, b'hadami ahadadi. Even though those are more substantial Rosh Hashanahs, they're more significant Rosh Hashanahs, since the Mishnah qualifies them all in one shot, you can't fast on these Rosh Hashanahs, on this Rosh Hashanah either. So Rabbeinu Gershon is making a sort of like a hekesh hazah, that Rosh Hashanah, since this is included in the list of Rosh Hashanahs, you're not allowed to fast in this Rosh Hashanah either. Now, another nakuda, so that's the Gavi the din of fasting. Now, what about the Gavi the din of, now there's another technical din that comes up in Shulchan Aruch, the Gavi not saying tachnon. That the Beis Yosef and the Shulchan Aruch brings down, that we don't say tachnon on Tu B'Shvat. It says it comes from the Maram, it really comes from Maril. The Maril brings from the Maram. The Maram says, Ve'einayim rimtchina b'chol erev Yom Tov, v'lei b'chol Rosh Hashanah, ve'einayim rimtchina b'Tu B'Shvat b'Boker. We don't say tachnon on Tu B'Shvat in the morning. V'kaim alon kebeis Hillel, da'imrim b'tasvav B'Shvat, Rosh Hashanah li'ilanos l'taimei u'l'maisir l'shviyas. Now, the way the Maril says it is there's like a Rosh Hashanah li'ilanos, and then also l'maisir l'shviyas, yana din. There's like another din. The technical din of Zrayim is a separate nekuda. But there's also something that this is a Rosh Hashanah. Somehow this is a Rosh Hashanah, and on Rosh Hashanahs, we don't say tachnon. Now, the Mechaber paskins like this, and incidentally, the Goyin, the Bir Hagra, Afanart, and the Shulchan Aruch over there, without quoting the Rabbeinu Gershon, makes the same hekesh. He says, the Goyin says, Shu Rosh Hashanah li'ilanos, who kamoy kol daled Rosh Hashanah she'en Yom Tov. Now here you have the first time, or one of the first times, that someone calls it Lahedya Yamtif. Meaning this, that maybe some people wear a strimal and then make a tish, and then all the minhagim of Yamtif. Here you start seeing that Api the Shulchan Aruch already, there's a din, some sort of din, that Tu B'Shvat is called a Yamtif. You know how to say Tachnun on it, you know how to make a Tainus on it. You see that in the early Paiskim, and even making it the Shulchan Aruch, meaning there is no siman in Shulchan Aruch that says Hilchas Tu B'Shvat. That's like the confusion. There's no makar in Shulchan Aruch that says B'yoyim Tu B'Shvat, X, Y, and Z, the Hilchas Tu B'Shvat. But if you start looking in Siman Kuf Lamed Aleph Hilchas Tachnun, and you look in Tafresh Pei Hilchas Tainus, and you look in the different places where Yamim Tovim get their nature, you start seeing that according to the Maril, according to Rebbeinu Gershom, according to other Gedolei HaPoskim, there is some sort of Yamtiftika element that's being attached to the Yom Tu B'Shvat. Maybe simply because it's brought down in the Mishnayos together with other Rosh Hashanahs, so Vaistis, it has some sort of inyan of Rosh Hashanah that's attached to this day. Now, once it's Rosh Hashanah, so then we don't fast, we don't say Tachnun, and then already the other stuff start growing. Now, the main one that gets attached to this Yom Tif is the eating Peiros. So where's the first place that comes from? So the first sefer that's maskir, the eating Peiros, on Rosh Hashanah, on this Rosh Hashanah, on this Yom Tif of Tu B'Shvat, is a sefer Tikkun Yisachar, which is a sefer from Reb Yisachar Susian or Susyan. Reb Yisachar Susyan, he's a Moroccan Jew, not from our camp, a Moroccan Jew who moved to Tzvas during the 1500s. And he becomes very close to all the different chugim, the different rabbis and rabbanim who were in Tzvas at the time, and he starts collecting everybody's different minhagim. And in the Sefer Tikkun Yisachar, which is a sefer more or less be'ikr about zmanim, and Seder Hashanah, over there he brings that he says Shamati he says v'noyigim Ashkenazim. I saw a minig by the Ashkenazim laharbris by on Tu B'Shvat b'minei peiris elon l'chvoid shmoy shel hayoim. To be mechabed this day, l'choid shmoy shel hayoim. Now this is in, call it 1550 or whatever. He's writing that I already see a minig by the Ashkenazim. This is exclusively with Ashkenazim, not Hasidim, not Svardim. There was no Hasidim, meaning exclusively with Ashkenazi Kehila. That I see that they eat Paris on this day. This is what the Tikkun Yisachar brings. Now, the Magen Avram in Siman Kuf Lamed Aleph by Tachnun, when the Mechaber says that you can't say Tachnun on Tu B'Shvat because it has the din of a Yom Tif, the Magen Avram tells too this thing that the Tikkun Yisachar says that you're supposed to be married with Paris. So now we have a whole collection of Kilu sources that predate all the Sabbatai Tzvi stuff. Meaning this is all from hundreds, sometimes 500 years before the Sabbatai Tzvi stuff. And basically the picture that's being created is that there was a minig amongst the Ashkenazim, exclusively Ashkenazim, to eat some Paris on Tu B'Shvat because it's Paris Elon, because it's Rosh Hashanah Elonis, and not to fast, and not to say Tachnun, because it has the din of a Yom Tif of some sort. Now, more recently, they even dug up in the Cairo Geniza, they found two little shards of piyutim that were set on Tu B'Shvat. Now those are 1,000-year-old piyutim that were set on Tu B'Shvat, way before Sabbatai Tzvi and Talmidim. Now, granted, there's not a lot of them, and let's say by something like Rosh Chodesh, for example, which everyone, we know what Rosh Chodesh is, so in the Cairo Geniza you'll find tens of shards of piyutim for Rosh Chodesh, or something like that. Or Rosh Hashanah you'll find tens, because it was a very common, common practice for everybody. Something that was a little more niche, that not everybody did, you'll find much less of. So this is clearly not something that was like Rosh Chodesh, that every single, Chugah of Klal Yisrael celebrated, but clearly there was already piyutim that were made for this Yom Tif of Tu B'Shvat. Now, so we already have the minig to eat Paris, the minig to treat it as a Yom Tif exists from much earlier on. Now, was it turbocharged by Sabbatai Tzvi and his following? Absolutely. Meaning the Sefer Chemdas Yamim certainly put it on the map in a big way, and the Kuntres Pri Eitz Hadar, which is the paraphrasing of the Chemdas Yamim, certainly took that to the next level. There's no question that it was turbocharged, but clearly the Makairis and the Shrashim of this Yom Tif, and even the Minhagim of this Yom Tif, come from much earlier on. Now, when the Chassidim came along, so the Chassidim added some new wrinkles to the Tu B'Shvat, even more so. Now, I just want to share, there's a story with the Baal Shem Tov, it's a great story. The Baal Shem Tov, in Brod, in the city of Brody in Poland, there was a Kleis, right? It's a famous Kleis, the Brod Kleis, everyone's heard of it. I think the most famous Talmid Chachamim to matriculate from the Brod Kleis was the Noda B'Yehuda, B'Shalem McCluger, meaning some of the Mamish, the Gedolei Hadar, the first tier Gedolei Hadar, came from the Brod Kleis. Now, in the Brod Kleis, there was someone whose name was Rav Chaim Tzanzer. He's not Rav Chaim Tzanzer, the Tzanzer Rav. He's Rav Chaim Tzanzer 100 years before the Tzanzer Rav. He's Rav Chaim Rappaport of Tzanz. The Noda B'Yehuda actually has a few tshuvas to him. He was a Talmud Chacham Muvak, above reproach, and a big Mekubal. Now, at some point, Rav Chaim Tzanzer, the original Rav Chaim Tzanzer, becomes close to the Baal Shem Tov. and the brother Klois becomes aware of the Baal Shem Tov's new Hanhagas. And they are furious, as would be appropriate in the time, and they summon the Baal Shem Tov to come to the brother Klois to, come present what you are, we'll talk about it, and we'll see what will paskin on you. So the Baal Shem Tov is traveling with one of his Talmidim to the brother Klois, and they realize that, it's Tu B'Shvat, and we have no fruit with us. So the Baal Shem Tov stops on the side of the road, and he walks up to a tree. It's bitter cold. It's bitter cold, and Baal Shem Tov looks at the tree and he says, I forgot which pasuk he says. The Baal Shem Tov looks at the tree, he says, V'yeda kalpol ki ata pa'alta, v'yavim kal yitzor ki ata yitzarta, v'yomer kal Hashem neshama b'yapeh, Hashem lekei so melech malchusa b'chol mashallah. He looks at the tree and he instructs the tree to participate in the malchus of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And suddenly the tree starts growing some fruits, and the Baal Shem Tov and his Talmud take some fruit off the tree, and they make a shechiyanu, and they make a eitz, and they're noyig the minhagim of Tu B'Shvat. Now the Talmud, seeing this as a major opportunity to show the brother Klois people how chashuv the Baal Shem Tov is, he quickly takes a few fruits and he surreptitiously puts it in a paper bag in his pocket. He figures he's going to bring fresh fruit in Poland in the middle of the winter is unheard of. It doesn't exist, meaning there was no import and export. You didn't have fruit coming. Fresh fruit in Poland didn't exist. I'm going to bring them a fresh pear, a fresh apple. They're going to chop. They're not dealing with regular people over here, and they'll already back down. So he puts it in his pocket. When they get to Brod, as they're about to walk in, he takes out his checkmate, he takes out his paper bag with the papers in there, and he looks inside, and it's just sloshing around. It's just rotted, watery, totally ruined fruit. And he looks at the Baal Shem Tov, expectantly, like, what happened? And the Baal Shem Tov tells him, you think these people are going to be convinced by Moifsim? You have the whole wrong track with these people. This is not what they need. We need to talk to them. And they go in, and they talk, and etc. I'd rather don't think that the Anshe brother Klois ever came around, Dafka, but just an interesting Tu B'Shvat story in regard to Chassidus. Now, in the Chassidish Welt, and I see we're running out of time, I'm not going to be able to go into all the many, but I think the most famous one that became very famous is the davening for an esrog. Now, it's interesting, esrog and Tu B'Shvat are connected before Chassidim. It's brought down in the early Svarim that an esrog that was used l'tzarech mitzvah should be used for another mitzvah. Now, it says that you should boil it up, make some sort of jam out of it, and serve it for Talmid. The original way the Maril, I think, says it is to serve it to Talmidei Chachamim, or serve it on Shabbos. It wasn't dafka a Tu B'Shvat thing, but the idea of using this, repurposing the esrog for another mitzvah is something that existed. Now, the Chassidim came and said, okay, so then the perfect time to use the esrog is Tu B'Shvat. And there's a lot of different minhagim to use it. Some, eat it cooked one way, cooked another way. Some use it starting from Tu B'Shvat all the way till Pesach. Every Shabbos a little bit. There's many different minhagim. But once the esrog and Tu B'Shvat became connected, so there's tefillas for a good esrog, right? That became the day that you daven for a good esrog. Now it's interesting because that's, if you paid attention, the day that's Rosh Hashanah Li'Ilanos, that Peiros are needed is Batzeres, is on Shavuos. It's not on Tu B'Shvat. But the Minig, the Bnei Yisachar had a tefillah, and eventually the Ben Ishchai had a tefillah, and there's many more. This is from a Sefer L'Shayin Chachamim that became a very popular one. I think today you could find, there's a dime a dozen, there's many different eschayos of davening for a good esrog on Tu B'Shvat. The Tu B'Shvat's the day that an esrog, and there's many stories. The Kotzker once was sitting with his Talmidim on Tu B'Shvat, and he said they were doing, they were having a tish for Tu B'Shvat, and suddenly he turned to one Talmud and he said, you daven hard for an esrog, daven hard for an esrog. And they all started davening for an esrog, and a few days later, where that Talmud came from, whatever area of Europe he came from, a war broke out, and Taka that year it was almost impossible to get an esrog where that Talmud lived. So there's many stories like this in the Chassidish Welt of esrogim and Tu B'Shvat. That became a very, very connected day. Now, what I want to say, it's endless. There's so many different minhagim that became part of this. Meaning, in Rishon there's minhag b'ti Peiros Eretz Yisrael, and other camps. It's endless. I'm not going to be able to give every one of the different Chassidish minhagim that became attached to Tu B'Shvat, but Tu B'Shvat kept growing and growing, Kedarka B'Kodesh, and even though at some point it was connected to the Sabbatai movement, it clearly is Shrasha B'Harei Kedem. It comes from a much earlier place, and it was picked up later on by other people and continued to grow and grow in many different ways. And that's just in regards to Tefillah Fasting. I'll just tell you one more nekuda. We'll end off with this. The Satmar Rebbe in Divrei Yoel addresses this kasha that I just asked. He says, we know that Atzeres is Rosh Hashanah, is Nidan ala Peiros, right? Atzeres is the time when Peiros are judged. So why are we davening for an esrog on Tu B'Shvat? And he says, this is true for people, and this is true for trees. A person and a tree are judged by the Peiros they produce. You're judged by what you're capable of giving out, what you're producing, the children, all kinds of children. I mean, you're judged by the mark you leave, by the peiros you produce. It says so when a tree on Tu B'Shvat, which is the time for the Elon, that's the time for davening for the peiros. A tree is judged by the peiros that it puts out. Anyhow, okay. To be continued. Next week, I think, is midwinter. We're going to take a break. We'll continue.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.